Hello, and thank you very much for joining us and taking the time this morning. My name is Ryan Loomis, and I'm here with my colleague Heidi Holtz. And we're both research analysts in CNA's China and Indo-Pacific Security Affairs Division. We are really glad to have this opportunity to tell you about our recently completed research into gaps that exist between the stated policies and rhetoric of the People's Republic of China and the illicit maritime activities that some PRC vessels, companies, and other entities allegedly engage in. Before we get into the substance of our presentation, I would like to give you a little bit of background about CNA and this project. So CNA is an independent, not-for-profit, and nonpartisan research institute in Arlington, Virginia. And CNA operates two research arms. The Center for Naval Analysis is a federally funded research and development center, and we also have the Institute for Public Research. And both of these are dedicated to providing independent and objective analyses to decision makers in all levels of government and informing the public discourse on critical domestic and international issues. And CNA has a long history, and we date back to 1942. And CNA's analysts have a wide range of expertise that spans everything from the hard sciences to the social sciences. Heidi and I belong to CNA's China and Indo-Pacific Security Affairs Division, which focuses its research on what we consider to be the most dynamic region in the world. One of the things that we're going to be doing during this webinar is asking all of you some questions to see whether what we are presenting is informing or aligning or not with your perspective. So with that, we'd like to start by asking a question. And that is that China has the largest distant water fishing fleet in the world. And we want to ask, do you think that the PRC is legally responsible for policing its vessels' behavior? And we're going to give one moment here. I'm going to check in. So I'm going to end this poll. And I'll note that I asked this question for two reasons. First is that China's distant water fishing fleet is huge and it operates globally. And while estimates of its size vary, it has at least 2,600 vessels. Moreover, there are hundreds of other PRC flagged vessels, including commercial shipping vessels, as well as government-owned vessels and military ships. They're all operating around the globe. So their collective behavior has the potential to have an enormous impact on the marine environment, fish stocks, and other maritime aspects that impact the lives of people who are tied to the maritime environment. And because of this fleet's vast size and global area of operation, it is important that people understand what Beijing says these vessels are doing. More importantly, though, it's crucial that people understand what these vessels are actually doing. And my second point with this particular question is to highlight that Beijing is legally responsible for the behavior of PRC flagged vessels. And my colleague Heidi Holtz will speak more about this shortly. So that is why we undertook this project, to gain a better understanding of how PRC actors are behaving in the international maritime domain and how this behavior compares to Beijing's policies. So the goal of this project was to provide an objective analysis of any gaps between PRC policy and rhetoric regarding the maritime domain and the illicit activities that PRC actors reportedly engage in. The approach that we used hinged on us building out 15 case studies focusing on reported instances of illicit maritime behavior carried out by PRC actors over the last 3 years in waters surrounding Southeast Asia, the Pacific Island countries, and along the Atlantic coast of Africa. With that, I'll turn it over to Heidi to discuss our data.
Thanks, Ryan. So for each of the 15 case studies, we looked at three things. First, we looked at the incident itself and the alleged illegal activity carried out by PRC actors. And for that, we looked at news media reporting from the affected country, reports by NGOs, and data from maritime domain awareness platforms and vessel tracking databases. And we did all this to get as complete a picture as possible of the PRC vessel or company's behavior. Second, we looked at what the PRC had to say about the incident or activity. And for that, we looked at PRC official statements, such as the daily press conferences hosted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and PRC white papers. We also looked at PRC media reporting on the activity, especially if it was targeted at audiences in the affected countries, published in their languages. And finally, we looked at international maritime laws and regulations to understand which ones were being undermined by the behavior of PRC actors. And before we looked at specific cases, we wanted to understand what the PRC's general policies are about how PRC vessels, individuals, and companies should behave in the international maritime domain. And according to Beijing's stated policies, PRC actors should abide by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, to which China is a signatory. And under Article 94 of UNCLOS, flag states such as the PRC are responsible for ensuring that vessels flying the PRC flag comply with the maritime laws to which Beijing is a party. So this speaks to Ryan's question a moment ago about whether Beijing is responsible. As a signatory to UNCLOS under Article 94, they are responsible for the behavior of their vessels and companies. And they're responsible for holding violators of maritime laws accountable. Beijing also calls on PRC vessels and companies to abide by local laws and regional frameworks in the areas in which they're operating overseas. To that end, PRC officials denounce illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing and have vowed to combat it within China's huge distant water fishing fleet. And finally, according to PRC official statements, Beijing is committed to safeguarding and protecting the maritime environment, and it calls on PRC-based actors to do the same. So with these policies in mind, I have a question. Do you think PRC actors such as fishing vessels and companies follow these policies when operating overseas? Do they do it most of the time, some of the time, or rarely? Ryan, you can probably go ahead and move forward on the slides. Well, I can't say for certain how often PRC actors follow Beijing's policies. My sense would be most of the time. But I can say that it was relatively easy for us to identify at least 15 instances in which they were accused of maritime violations in the last 3 years. Which brings me to my next question. Which violations do you think they were accused of? Ramming Senegalese and Brazilian vessels, polluting the Gambia's waters, forcing Indonesian fishermen to work PRC fishing boats in violation of their rights, or all three of these things? And the short answer is all three of these things. PRC vessels and companies were accused of all three of these things within the last 3 years, including a number of other types of violations. And I'll turn it back over to Ryan to tell you about that.
Great, thank you, Heidi. So the top line finding from our analysis is that some PRC actors do engage in a variety of illicit maritime activities that contradict Beijing's stated policies and official narratives. Among the 15 cases that we examined, PRC actors were accused of being involved in the following 6 types of illegal activities. First, engaging in illegal, unregulated, and unreported, or IUU fishing. And IUU fishing, we know, threatens ocean ecosystems and sustainable fisheries. Second, intentionally ramming foreign vessels, damaging those vessels and endangering their crews. Third, using forced labor aboard fishing vessels and engaging in human smuggling. Fourth, discharging marine pollution from vessels and land-based sources, and this can harm the marine environment as well as injure local citizens. Fifth, tampering with or deactivating electronic tracking or monitoring devices in order to go dark so that those vessels can engage in illicit activities without being monitored. And finally, 6, illegally entering and illegally operating in other countries' jurisdictional waters. So this graphic you see on the screen is a map showing the geographic range and the types of illicit maritime activities that we observed PRC actors engaging in within our 15 case studies. Now, I'll move into just a few examples of the types of PRC behaviors we observed. I know Heidi mentioned this during her summary of our data, but I wanted to foot stomp again here that all of our case studies relied heavily on local media and local government reporting to inform our understanding and inform our analysis of the alleged PRC activity. So for example, this top image is a Vietnamese fishing vessel after having been struck by a PRC Coast Guard ship. And that image is from Vietnam's state news agency, Thanh Nien. The bottom image is a Philippines fishing boat having been struck by a PRC fishing vessel. And that image is from the Philippines news agency. So in our case study on ramming, we observed 5 different allegations of PRC vessels ramming foreign vessels in the last several years. And these foreign vessels came from the Philippines, Mauritania, Vietnam, Senegal, and Brazil. Well, what does the PRC have to say about ramming and about safety at sea? Well, PRC official statements assert that PRC vessels strictly abide by maritime safety laws and norms. In response to critical regional reporting, though, about PRC ramming and unsafe maneuvers at sea, PRC officials and PRC media have alternatively denied that these incidents occurred, blamed the other vessel that was struck, or just ignored the allegations. Unsurprisingly, there are multiple laws, multiple rules, both international and national, that make intentionally ramming another vessel illegal. Excuse me. A second example is that of PRC vessels and coastal infrastructure polluting local waters. This top satellite image is from a US imagery analysis company showing chlorophyll A blooms around stationary vessels allegedly from the PRC and anchored within the Philippines exclusive economic zone. These chlorophyll A blooms indicate sewage discharge over time, which is both illegal and can lead to ecosystem damage and further reduced fish stocks. The bottom image on your screen is from a Gambian reporter showing a lagoon preserve that was allegedly damaged by illegally discharged effluent from a PRC fish meal factory. As you can see, the official narrative from Beijing is that China is a responsible steward of the maritime environment. But in response to recent reports indicating that some PRC actors have broken from this PRC policy, Beijing officials and authoritative media have responded by calling the reports, quote, fake news and efforts to, quote, smear China. In other words, PRC officials and authoritative media vocally deny the allegations and call them fake, politically motivated. As a final example today, this alleged behavior involves PRC flagged fishing vessel operators exploiting dozens of Indonesian crew members, many of whom have died from illness, beatings, and unsafe working conditions or lack of food since 2019. These labor abuses and deaths of Indonesian crew aboard PRC vessels has been well documented by the Indonesian Migrant Workers Union, Indonesian media and officials, as well as by international NGOs. What does the PRC say about this? Well, the official narrative from Beijing is that the PRC is a responsible fishing nation that wouldn't commit such crimes. And indeed, there is a PRC law designed to protect the rights of foreign crew aboard PRC distant water fishing boats. However, faced with these multiple reports of rights abuses, the PRC Ministry of Foreign Affairs turned to saying that the, quote, reports of abuses are politically motivated false accusations. Similarly, PRC authoritative media published in Bahasa Indonesian and other languages called the reports, quote, lies designed to create contradiction between Indonesia and China. And again, there are multiple international, regional, Indonesian, and PRC laws that are violated by this alleged behavior. So the question for everyone here is, do you think that Beijing's responses to these allegations are consistent with its policies, contradict its policies, or you're not sure? And Heidi, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Ryan. So as Ryan mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, let's see, sorry. The presentation is called Exposing the Gap. So, and that's what we found too. Our biggest takeaway from our research is that there's a consistent gap between PRC rhetoric and the illegal behavior of some PRC actors in the international maritime domain. And perhaps unsurprisingly, given their huge numbers, the most frequent offenders are members of China's huge distant water fishing fleet. The PRC's ruling Communist Party is very image conscious. They're concerned about China's international image, and they seek to minimize the negative impact of these allegations. And Beijing does this in three main ways that we observed: by refusing to acknowledge the allegations, by denying them, and sometimes even going so far as to accuse the victims of being responsible for the incidents. And these efforts to downplay the illegal actions of PRC actors contradict what we found to be credible reports of bad behavior. In the cases we looked at for this study, the illegal activity was reported by foreign authorities, NGOs, and news media. And these reports often included supporting data from or evidence from maritime domain awareness platforms, fishing logbooks, first-person interviews, and even photo and video evidence. And in the face of this evidence, Beijing's responses create the appearance that rather than acknowledging and addressing the behavior of some PRC actors, Beijing's publicly subverting international rules, laws, and norms by trying to sweep their behavior under the rug. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Heidi. So I will note that we have translated our case studies and our key takeaways report into the 6 languages spoken by the people of those countries where our case studies examined PRC maritime activities. So you can find our reports available in Arabic, Tagalog Filipino, Bahasa Indonesian, French, Khmer, and Malay. I'll send around a link on the CNA website for these translated documents, and you can feel free to share them with your colleagues and community members. So thank you all for listening to us present on our recently completed analysis on this important topic. And now we're going to turn to our panelists for regional views on the issue. So here's the order in which our panelists will go today. So first, we're going to turn it over to Dr. J. Batongbacal of the University of the Philippines Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea. So Dr. Batongbacal, take it away. I will present your slides here, and you can feel free to tell me when you'd like to move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you to the CNA and everyone's attending the seminar for being here to listen to us, whether it's synchronously or asynchronously. With respect to the report, I have read through it, both the summary and the full report, of course. And I find it quite credible because really, especially in the parts of the reports which concern the Philippines, it is corroborated by my own observations during those times, at the times of those incidents that are reported there, as well as news accounts, media accounts that have been circulating in the Philippines. It might also do well to add a little bit more detail because, for example, in the report on the illegal fishing activities that were being undertaken by China, I think it wasn't clearly brought out that actually some of these illegal activities are supported by or, well, condoned or even protected by the China Coast Guard. So, for example, in this news report that I'm showing to you on the screen, which you can also Google and search for, this is a report of illegal destructive clam harvesting activities. This kind of activity is illegal even in China. And yet, during the time that these were observed directly by a news crew that happened to be there, they were able to take a video record of the China Coast Guard, basically just hovering around them, essentially protecting the activity because they were not allowing Filipino boats to come near to the shoal and directly observed this illegal clam harvesting. On the pictures, you see the China Coast Guard boats, the smaller boats that they use to be able to board and inspect these vessels. And they were observed basically interacting with the Chinese clam digging operators. So from that experience, since these activities had been frequently reported year after year, especially after 2012, 2013, there had always been reports filtering up to the government from the fishermen that these were ongoing. And all throughout those times also, the China Coast Guard was in control of that area. So they basically were allowing these activities and protecting them from observation perhaps by the Filipino fishermen. Okay, could you move to the next slide, please, Ryan? Now, with respect to the concentration of vessels in certain areas of the South China Sea, actually I was able to directly observe them on one occasion just last October. This was around Pag-asa or Situ Island, and we actually saw up to 26 vessels at one time. On this day that we went out to do some marine scientific research activities, there were 26 Chinese fishing vessels and one Coast Guard vessel in that area. And while the report of the Similarity Incorporated used satellite data, the actual observations there at sea, we found that it wasn't just human waste, which is what the chlorophyll counts seem to indicate, because of the blooms, the algal blooms. And in that area, when our scientists were there, they did some sampling as well of garbage, actual plastic garbage, which they found was freshly thrown overboard, shall we say. And so these vessels are not only discharging these types of effluents or liquid waste, but they're also generating quite a bit of plastic waste, which at present has become the focus of international attention because of the huge amount of plastics and microplastics that are found all over the oceans. And you can see from these pictures, which I myself took, really the concentration of these vessels in just one spot could really generate a huge impact on the environment in that area. Could you move to the next slide? Yes. Yes. So this is another view of that area, and you see that they anchor very closely together. And so the amount of waste that each vessel generates each day that it's there is simply accumulating in that area. And it's probably just about every kind of waste that can be expected out of a vessel that just sits there stationary all that time, because most of these vessels would not even move. There was no activity, and at night, although they had lights on, they weren't doing any fishing activity. They were just stationary in that area. And then the next slide, please, Ryan. On the part of the report, what I did note, however, was that the report did not look into another possible gap in Chinese activity. And here in the Philippines, since 2016, we've been observing a constant entry of marine scientific research vessels entering the Philippine EEZ to conduct all sorts of marine scientific research activities, apparently, because the pattern of their movement indicates some kind of surveys usually or other activity. And yet these were not given any permission by the Philippines. And these vessels were often owned by either Chinese government research institutes or universities, which are ostensibly a non-government in character, but of course they're also still supported by Beijing. So this also, I think, demonstrates a gap in China's rhetoric, because although they say that they abide by international law and the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, yet when it comes to marine scientific research, which is governed by part of UNCLOS, which basically obligates all researching states to, number one, secure the consent of the state in whose jurisdiction it will conduct research, and second, afford them the opportunity to participate as well as offer to share their data and findings. All of these requirements have not been met at all by these Chinese MSR activities, which are continuing up to this year. The latest one was just a couple of months ago. And probably my final point on the parts of the report with respect to the ramming of vessels. What is not, however, seen in the news media reports is that it's actually a practice, almost a standard practice right now, of vessels of, say, the China Coast Guard to set up collision situations with vessels that they encounter, especially government vessels, to set up collision situations to cross the beam, as it's called, which creates these dangers of collision. So it's not just ramming, but actually setting up the collision themselves. And it has been reported to be undertaken as well by these fishing vessels of China, especially if we talk with our own local fishermen. They complain of being blocked by these large Chinese fishing vessels in order to prevent them from accessing their fishing grounds. So given this disparity in the size and the construction of these vessels, the smaller and poorer fishermen, of course, just avoid it. But then that also shows that it has become a practice, basically, among the Chinese maritime actors in that area. So I guess that's all I can say for now. Other than, of course, it's a very good report that's very accurate and well researched. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Batongbacal, and thank you for bringing up some of those other examples. I'm glad you brought up in particular the examples of the PRC research vessels conducting oceanographic surveys. We had another webinar yesterday where an editor, a journalist from Palau, brought up a recent example of a PRC research vessel entering into Palau's EEZ at the beginning of this month, conducting similar, unpermitted research in their waters. So, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Really interesting content. So now we're going to move into our second presentation by Nana Kweigya, the National President of the Canoe and Gear Fishers Association of Ghana. So Mr. Kweigya, please take it away.
Right, thank you, Ryan, and then good morning to everyone for today's meeting. In the case of Ghana, I am a small-scale fisher. I am a canoe owner. So our focus has been to what is driving the collapse of especially the small pelagic fishery, which is the staple catch of artisanal fishers, and how are we promoting the health of our ocean so that we can have fish now and in the future. We know in Ghana, foreign ownership is illegal, and relevant sections of our law 46 and 47 of Act 625 does not permit So for foreign trawlers, especially to be operating in Ghana, has been aided by fronting for license for these companies. So we have local companies who front for the licenses for these industrial vessels as a way of bypassing the system. I think a study by EGF in 2017 pointed to the fact that over 90% of trawlers fishing in Ghana are owned by Chinese companies who are operating under Ghanaian front companies. And it points to the fact that everything possible is being made to bypass the system so that access to our fisheries resources becomes available to these foreign trawlers. The most unfortunate thing is that we also have an opaque licensing regime. So to even have access to data as to exact trawlers or commercial fishing vessels in our waters sometimes becomes difficult, except to the top guys in the sector who are able to get access to some of these things. So you have a situation where you put it to an official of the ministry in charge of fisheries as to the number of trawlers in our waters, and you see that always it has been difficult to give a definite figure. Even presently, you see people saying between 74 to 77. So clearly you see that most people are unable to give a definite figure as to the number of trawlers who are fishing in our waters. And even with this 76 that are sometimes put out, you see that many of the fishers reject this number because over there in the sea is where we fish. So fishers see the number of trawlers that they meet on the way and the frequency with which they meet these trawlers, and they are unable to believe that they are 70, 76 or 74 that are usually put out. So clearly you see that there is this issue as to even the number of trawlers who are fishing in our vessels. So it is either the regulator is not giving the right figure, or we have vessels who are fishing in our waters at the blind side of the regulator. And that will point to illegal entry into our fisheries. Most worrying of these industrial vessels is the IUU fishing, which we all know in Ghana, it has been widespread across all sectors. But then there has been reports pointing to the fact that the activities of the industrial trawlers are very much devastating, are very much destructive. The trawling that is being done currently is very worrying because it is allowing the gears of these trawlers have been adapted to enable them harvest even small pelagics, even though the licensing condition does not permit them to harvest small pelagics. Now, small pelagics are also the staple catch of artisanal fishes. So anytime that trawlers venture into harvesting small pelagics, then you are actually depriving artisanal fishers of their catch. And once artisanal fishers are being deprived of their catch, we know the economic implications of that. In a report by Mariam Abawa in 2018, which was published by the Earth Journalism Network, it actually identified fishing in the IEZ by industrial trawlers as some of the issues that, or illegalities that is occurring, that is arising out of these activities. The use of fraudulent documentation was also mentioned. Illegal transshipment was also mentioned. And then tampering with vessel monitoring devices were also mentioned as common infraction by industrial vessels. In our case as artisanal fishers, fishing within the IEZ remains a critical issue because our laws forbid industrial vessels from fishing within the inshore exclusive zone. So we have 6 nautical miles or 30-meter depth, depending on which one is farther, as a zone exclusive for artisanal fishes. And that is where these small pelagics are most available. So if you have industrial vessels fishing within the IEZ, then it means they are actually competing with artisanal fishes. And we all know artisanal fishes cannot compete with these industrial vessels. And that has contributed to artisanal fishes not making enough catch. We also have the harvesting of small pelagics. And as I said earlier on, that is what artisanal fishers live on. And that is what most Ghanaians consume. At least the lower and then the middle income brackets, that is what we eat. So vessels harvesting small pelagics, that is also not allowed by the licensing conditions that are granted them. Another worrying is the harvesting of juvenile fish. I remember a study by University of Cape Coast pointed to the fact that 51% of the catches of these industrial vessels that are put into slabs are actually small pelagics, and out of that, over 70% are juvenile fish. So we have a situation where these industrial vessels, who are mostly Chinese vessels, of course, are harvesting juvenile fishes in large volumes. And once that is done or allowed to prevail, then we are actually eroding the potential of the resource to rebuild. And that actually threatens not only our future, but our current survival as well. Illegal transshipment has also been identified as another practice which affects us as artisanal fishers, because what is actually meant for us is what these industrial vessels harvest. And to beat the system, to do this at the blind side of the regulator, they arrange with some adapted canoes, and these adapted canoes go to take those small pelagic fishes from them, and that is what is brought to the shore for sale. Now, once this prevails, then it means the regulator is not able to keep proper records of how much is harvested, and so it affects data, it affects management and governance of our fisheries. We have also noted the issue of dumping of fish by these industrial trawlers. Some being very juvenile fish, harvesting them and then dumping them back into the sea. That is also that also remains an issue. When you are talking of Chinese vessels activities in Ghana, what comes to everybody's mind is cycle, which is a local name for this practice of industrial vessels harvesting small pelagic fishes, freezing them into pallets of fish, and then selling them to adapted canoes to be brought to the landing site for sale. And this is the most destructive, or has been identified as the most destructive form of IUU, because you are harvesting juvenile fish, which means you are eroding the potential of the resource to rebuild. You are harvesting small pelagic fish, you are denying artisanal fishers of their catch, you are transshipping them at sea, which is also against the law. If you are harvesting juvenile and small pelagic fish, then it means your GS have been adapted, the troll GS have also been adapted to allow the harvesting of surface and midwater fishes in addition to these juvenile fishes. So the whole cycle thing is a complete set of illegality that has been combined. And in fact, that is our greatest threat. I must say that in recent times, the transshipment has stopped, because what they used to land outside the ports, which many of us have spoken about and have called on the ministry to enforce the law, which states that these trawlers will have to land their catch at designated ports. In our case, that is Tema and then Takrady. So the known places where these cycle fishes or transship fishes are landed have stopped. But then the harvesting of the small pelagics and the juvenile fish have not stopped, because we know they are being landed at the designated ports. And we also know that dumping is also still ongoing. So practically, the practice has changed its form, because it was being landed at the landing site, noted landing site, Elmina Apam, that fishers see and we complain about. But now it is being landed at the ports and where you can't see everything, except that our women or the women fish processors go there and buy these slabs of fish. And when we open it, you see small pelagics, you see juvenile fish, which have been put into blocks of fish. So practically, it is still ongoing. Now, in recent times, we are actually drawing the attention of the ministry to the fact that it is actually a violation of human rights as well of artisanal fishers, because the Universal Declaration on Human Rights enjoins countries or states to ensure that citizens have adequate standard of living and then decent working condition. But if you have a situation where the artisanal fisher is being denied of what is duly ours by law and by nature, because we have been into this business even before the 1700s and long before recent times that commercial fishing came in. And God in his wisdom put us along the coast, while some people are at the hinterland. So the resource that is available to us is the fisheries resources. So we see that it is ours by nature. Again, our laws has given 6 nautical miles exclusively to us. And our laws has said that these industrial trawlers should not harvest small pelagic fishes. So practically the small pelagic fishes are also ours. So we have this by law and by nature. Now, if industrial vessels harvest these small pelagic fishes and artisanal fishers are unable to make catch, then what actually happens is that artisanal fishers will not have enough income to survive on. And I think a study by Hempano has pointed to the fact that in the last decade, income of artisanal fishers has fallen by as much as I think over 40%. So we are having a situation where artisanal fishers have got to live with reduced income. And once your income keeps reducing, then you should be assured that your standard of living will deteriorate. So activities of these industrial trawlers are actually depriving artisanal fishers of adequate standard of living, because we will have to eat and we also have to provide for our families. And if we are unable to do that or do that adequately, then it affects our standard of living. Again, we are unable to, since you are not making catch, the frustration of even going to sea alone makes it very difficult for you to survive. So we are seeing these activities of these industrial vessels, which are mostly Chinese, also as a human rights violation of small-scale fishers in Ghana. And I think some of these platforms should be used to highlight some of these issues so that the government can also step in. Yes, it is up to the destination countries. In our case, it is up to the regulator to enforce the laws and ensure that these vessels, wherever they came from, abide by the laws and do what the laws allows them. Yeah, but then just as countries have signed on to the UNCLOS, it is important for countries of origin, government of such countries to also step in and ensure that their companies, their vessels, their actors who are going out there in their name will also do what is expected of them, so that we can protect the resource for the other people. Mind you, next year is the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture, and it is important we work towards addressing some of these issues so that we can secure the well-being of the small-scale fisher now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kweigya. It was important for us to hear your perspective as a practitioner, as an artisanal fisherman who's looking at this problem set from a very personal vantage point. So thank you very much for that presentation. We're going to turn it over to Mr. Wisdom Akpalu now, who is based at the Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration. Mr. Akpalu, I will present your slides here and you can tell me when you are ready to move on to each new slide. Give me one moment. Okay, Mr. Akpalu, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Ryan and Hedy, for inviting me to do this presentation. And also, I want to say a big thank you to CNA for inviting me to present this work. I will say that Nana Kweigya has done justice to the issues that I would like to raise, most of the issues that I would like to raise, because in Ghana, we talk to each other. We have discussions all the time about some of these problems. So it has become a common knowledge, which is a beautiful thing. So you can go to the next slide, please. So I will just give a brief overview about the IUU fishing in Ghana as part of this discussion. Next slide, please. So just to put this whole discussion in perspective or in context, fishing is a very important activity in Ghana. In fact, it employs about 20% of the active labor force, which is about 2.7 million people of the population of about 30 million people. So this is actually a huge industry providing livelihood to so many people. And about 60% of the animal protein that we consume in Ghana comes from our fish. Comes from fish. Although we are not able to meet our protein requirement, which is about 40 kilograms per person per year, we are down to less than 20 kilograms per person per year. But fish provides about 60% of this. So the loss of the fishing or the collapse of the fishing industry will be something very, very significant to the survival of the nation, the livelihood of the nation as a whole. In terms of the size of the national economy, the fishing industry, if you consider both the direct and indirect activities related to fishing, it contributes between 4 and 5% to the size of the economy. So this is also very huge. And in terms of exports, Ghana gets approximately $15 million annually from exporting fish. So this is very important sector. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the dominant sector in this capture fisheries industry, and especially marine capture fishing industry, is the artisanal fishing subsector, which is the small-scale fishing subsector, to be precise. And it lands about 70% of the catch. And predominantly, these are juveniles. These are pelagic, small pelagic species. And then the trawl vessels or industrial trawlers land around only 6%. But they happen to be those that are causing a lot of problems for the artisanal vessels that are landing about 70%, employing about 80% of those working within the industry. You can go on. So what are the typical challenges within the fishing industry in Ghana? First, we have too many vessels. Looking at it from both the artisanal sector, which has currently about 15,000 canoes, the maximum sustainable yield and the effort level corresponding to the maximum sustainable yield. In other words, the catch that can sustain the maximum catch that can sustain the stock year upon year upon year should be between 8,000 and 9,000 canoes, but currently we have about 15,000 canoes, which is way, way more than what we should have. And then we also have this elephant in the room, which is subsidizing or subsidy on premixed fuel, which is the main fishing input. So this fuel is subsidized about 60% to make it easier for fishermen to go out there and catch fish, artisanal vessels to go out there and catch fish. They only end up getting a small fraction of this because a majority or a very significant portion of this subsidy goes to the pocket of some rent seekers. And allegations have been made about politicians benefiting from these subsidies. And this subsidy runs into about $40 million a year. and which is completely wasteful, in my view, as an economist, as a fisheries economist. But the other problem, which is perhaps even bigger, is IUU, which we have talked about, this illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing activity, which is perpetrated mostly by the small-scale fishers to some extent, but largely by the industrial vessels, mostly owned by Chinese. Can go to the next slide, please. So what are the implications of all this? A lot of vessels or overcapitalization of the fisheries, and then these subsidies on premixed fuel, which is completely unnecessary or wasteful, and then the IUU. What are the implications of this? Next slide, please. So we have declining catch per canoe. We had about over 35 kilograms catch per unit effort in about 1992 thereabouts, where it peaked to now less than 15 kilograms per canoe per year. We are now importing a lot more fish than we used to import. In fact, about 60% of the fish that we consume locally are imported. And the contribution to GDP, and here I'm talking about both direct and indirect activities related to fishing, that is all the value chain, from about 6% to now around 4%. Fish consumption per capita has declined from about 27 kilograms per person per year to approximately 20% per person per year, or even less in some cases. So these are all serious concerns. And then we have loss of earnings, as my colleague Nana has already hinted, of about 40%. So fishermen, and a recent study by EJF, Environmental Justice Foundation, which I was a part of as a consultant, had some interesting revelations about 80 to 90% of the fishermen and the fish processors have complained that their earnings have gone down. 70 to 75% have complained or indicated that their livelihoods have deteriorated. And then about 60% thereabout have also indicated that they have gone without sufficient food for the past 12 months or so. So all these are issues that are really hitting us very hard as far as the fishery sector is concerned. Next slide, please. Now, when we talk about IUU, or illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing in Ghana, what comes to mind is cycle. And when you are in Ghana, this is what you hear over and over and over. What does this mean? And my friend has already, colleague has already highlighted this, but I just want to mention this again. That cycle is a multiplicity of all kinds of illegalities. So I look at the picture here, just the combination of fish that have been landed to give you an indication of what this whole issue is about. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the term originated in the 70s. It's actually a Japanese word. I think it started from saite to cycle. When Japanese vessels, industrial vessels, were fishing in Ghanaian waters, if they land fish that they do not want or they do not like because they are bycatches, they will throw them back, they will dump them back into the ocean. And they consider those fish as bad fish, saite. So Ghanaian canoe vessels were going offshore to deeper into the ocean to see, this close to these vessels, realized that those vessels were dumping fish. So they told them, they informed them that this is fish that they eat, we Ghanaians can eat, so they should give it to them. And then they say, oh, this is saite, this is bad fish. Then they said, no, we actually eat them. They say, oh, then it means it's psycho, it's good fish. Then they started giving this to Ghanaians for free. Eventually, when they realized that there was demand for it, people were coming there to get them. The people went, there was some competition, and when they were going, they would go and exchange vegetables and all that for the fish. And after a while, it became something that was, marketable. So people started paying money for it. And then when all this was over and, the Chinese vessels took over the industrial fishing, it became even a bigger business. What happened is that the industrial fishing in Ghana, according to our act, the Fisheries Act 625, and the relevant sections are cited by my colleague, I think 46 and 47. Industrial fishing or industrial trawling is supposed to be done by Ghanaians. So it's a preserve of Ghanaians and Ghanaians only. But because Ghanaians don't have the capital, they can go into some high purchase agreement and then acquire these vessels and use them. So this is where the trick comes in. So a Ghanaian who is interested in embarking on this type of activity will then have to contact a Chinese vessel out there who wants to partner with the Ghanaians and go into industrial trawling. And then the idea is not actually to sign an agreement which will, or a high purchase agreement, a very credible high purchase agreement for the vessel to become that of a Ghanaian after 4 or 5 years. The idea is to sign some phony agreement, make it look like the vessel actually belongs to the Ghanaian company or whatever, but the beneficial ownership still remain with the Chinese. So they'll come in, they'll fly the Ghana flag. So when you see them, they are Ghanaian vessels, and then they'll fish here. The problem, however, is not that they are fishing here and we only get a small fraction of the rents or the profit that they get from fishing. The problem is that when they come in, they engage in all kinds of illegalities. One, the cycle which involves the catching of small pelagic species, which the trawl vessels are not licensed to land. They are licensed to land demersal stock, fish that dwell at the bottom of the ocean. But then they target small pelagics, anchovies, sardines, mackerel. These are the ones they target. And they don't only just target the matured ones, they also target the juveniles. And they adapt their fishing gear so they can catch anything that passes by. And then sometimes they come to fish even within the inshore exclusive zone, which is an area that is marked and reserved for artisanal fishers. They come there and fish, sometimes by manipulating or putting off their VMS. So they come there and fish for over a year. The VMS was not working with the connivance of course, the management authorities, including politicians. So they switch those things off. They come, they fish within those. And then sometimes they even destroy the benthic floor of the ocean. So all these activities will lead to catching these small pelagics, freezing them into pellets, and then selling them at sea to canoes that have been adapted by some middlemen, artisanal, fishers who have now become, just traders. They go there, they buy them, they bring them to the shore, and they sell them to women who will then, process them and then sell them as, fried fish or whatever to consumers. So, and sorry. And about 90% of these trawl vessels are, the beneficial owners are Chinese. They are not Ghanaians. So all the flags they fly as though they are Ghanaians, it's just phony. It's not correct. Let's go to the next slide, please. So right now, as my colleague indicated, we are told there are about 76 trawl vessels operating in Ghana. Of course, in 2014, the number was 103, but an ODI, Overseas Development Institute report 2020 indicated that Ghana is the country with the largest number of distant water fleet from China operating. And there are about 137 vessels operating in our waters. And out of these 137 distant water fleets, about 121 of them are trawlers, are industrial trawlers. So the numbers we have on our records are 76. It's not accurate. It's either we are only counting the few that are registered with us or operational at some point. I don't know how the numbers got to differ so much. And all of them are engaged in cycle business in one way or the other because it's very lucrative. Now, in 2017, as indicated, the cycle landings alone was about 100,000 tons with a beach value, when it was brought to the beach and traded, value of up to over $80 million a year. So this is a big business. that these trawlers are engaged in. And as you can see, this leads to depletion of the stock, and it is a significant portion of, if you compare that with the artisanal landing, the landing of the sector that is supposed to be the major sector, landing about, landing about 70% of the total fish landings from the ocean. It's about 57%. So this is quite a large number. Unfortunately, the Fisheries Commission, which is actually the wing of the sector ministry that is supposed to be, regulating fishing activities, is not interested in even collecting data on how much cycle landing, how much of this illegal landing that comes through every year. Politically, there is no will to do that. Go on, please. So why is this ongoing? Although, landing juveniles is an offense, transshipping at sea is also an offense, fishing within the inshore exclusive zone is an offense. All these are offenses in our books. All these are clear violations of our regulations. So why is it still going on? I think in crime and punishment, when you study economics of crime and punishment, you clearly understand that crime is any other business activity. If the risk of punishment or the chances that you'll be caught and punished is quite low, or the fine is very low, or both of them are low, then there is a high incentive for business people to engage in criminality. So let's proceed, please. So when it comes to imposing fine or penalizing those who are engaged in violating fishing regulations in Ghana, the laws are clear, but if a trawler is caught or violating any of these fishing regulations, engaging in cycle, the owners of the trawler can opt for an out-of-court arbitration, which is called an alternative dispute resolution. So they just have to apply that I don't want to go to the law courts. And then once they apply, they opt for this alternative dispute resolution, alternative settlement arrangement. The case will be taken from court and taken to, this arbitration, where very funny things happen. Because at the end of the day, they end up paying ridiculously low fines if they are found guilty. And those fines have no correlation with what they would have paid in court. So my position on this, as I discussed with some officials some time ago, is that even if the case is taken from court to an alternative dispute resolution, you cannot let anyone pay a fine which is lower than what the court would have charged. I mean, the minimum fine that the court would have prescribed. Unfortunately, that is not the case. As soon as it goes to the ADR, the final authority is the sector minister. And the minister has prerogative, that unfettered discretion of deciding how much a violating fisher should pay. So it could be as low as possible. No one, can challenge it. And it doesn't have to bear any resemblance to what the court would have charged. So let's proceed, please. So this is just a typical example of a computation I did some time ago. So imagine you put the maximum and the minimum fine together and divide it by 2, what that the court would have charged. And then compare this with what they actually paid. For example, if juveniles are involved, the fine is between $1 million and $2 million. But then for the first offender, but then we have a situation where the vessels are paying 9% of that average. So this is not 9% of even the maximum. 9% of a simple average of minimum maximum fine divided by 2. And when it is fishing within the inshore exclusive zone where the artisanal fishers are supposed to operate, they pay 34%, which is what the minister or the alternative dispute resolution would have recommended. And when it involves transshipment, where you move your items or fish from your vessel to, if you are caught, I mean, hardly are they caught. So the likelihood of being caught is almost nil. But when you are caught, and then you are brought before this alternative dispute resolution, you pay, the average fine they paid from the data that I had was about 3%. So this actually makes committing of these crimes extremely lucrative, and that is why the practice is ongoing. The next slide, please. So yeah, so this is my story. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akpalu. Really good to hear the policy and the legal and the outcomes of these cases. I know that I've got some questions. You raised a series of cross-cutting issues that we covered in our reports, notably problems associated with shutting off or deactivating VMS or AIS within Ghana's waters. So I want to come back to that as a question for you. First, though, we are going to play a recorded presentation from Mr. Imran Vittachi, who's the Deputy Managing Editor of BenarNews. Give me one moment.
Thanks to CNA for inviting me to speak here today. Before I begin, I'd like to tell you a little about BenarNews. We're a unit of Radio Free Asia based in Washington and funded through a grant from the US government. We publish in 5 countries, 5 languages, and have a team of about 60 stringers scattered between the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Bangladesh. Through our partnership with RFA, we've added a correspondent who is solely dedicated to the South China Sea beat. Today, I'll be talking about how our news organization covers the South China Sea story. We tell this big geopolitical story from different angles and what I call different altitudes. It's all about trying to make an impact while telling the story, whether it's at the international relations level or down at the ground level, where the lives of ordinary people are affected. Share screen. Next slide. In its essence, the South China Sea story is about an Asian superpower and smaller neighbors competing for maritime resources and a territorial foothold in a strategic waterway. As it expands outward economically and militarily, China has been pushing the boundaries of its claims in the sea region. The lines are now being blurred. BenarNews started paying closer attention to this story in June 2016, right before an international arbitration court ruled for the Philippines in Manila's lawsuit against Beijing in their dispute over the South China Sea. Next slide. It's worth noting that while China keeps sending its ships into the maritime EEZs of neighboring countries, Beijing remains among their top trade and investment partners, if not number 1. China is financing big-ticket infrastructure projects in those countries. This gives Beijing economic clout, which could explain why some South China Sea countries such as Malaysia and Indonesia are relatively soft in responding to intrusions by Chinese ships in their exclusive economic zones. Next slide. As I see it, BenarNews captures the South China Sea story from different altitudes. Sometimes we tell it from lower Earth orbit through the use of satellite images and platforms that track ship movements. At a lower altitude, let's call it 30,000 feet, we tell the story of how governments interact. Finally, we tell the story from ground and sea level by putting a human face to it so that our readers can see themselves in the story. Now I'll give you some examples of what I'm talking about. Next slide, please. Here, you're looking at satellite images we used to report on a diplomatic row between the Philippines and China earlier this year over the presence of hundreds of Chinese ships at a place called Whitsun Reef. The reef is inside Manila's exclusive economic zone. And at the time, Manila was firing off daily diplomatic protests. This boomerang-shaped reef in the Spratly Islands is claimed by the Philippines, China, and Vietnam. Next slide. Then in November, we reported that Chinese ships were returning to Whitsun Reef. 3 days after BenarNews and Radio Free Asia came out with this story, reports in Vietnamese media used the same satellite image we had used. According to these reports, based on this image, Hanoi demanded that China stop violating Vietnamese sovereignty in Whitsun Reef. It looks to us that our reporting prompted Vietnam's reaction. Next slide. The story of the South China Sea also unfolds at the international relations level. This is where we report on what various governments are saying about the issue. And this is where we have a hard time getting Chinese embassies to comment, although we try in an effort to tell a fair and balanced story. For its part, the Chinese Foreign Ministry regularly denies that Chinese ships are intruding in the waters of other countries, claiming that this maritime territory is actually China's. And while this is going on, Chinese officials regularly talk about the need for joint efforts to safeguard stability in the maritime region. At a special China-ASEAN summit last month, President Xi Jinping assured his Southeast Asian counterparts that his country was not a bully. He said this shortly after the Chinese Coast Guard fired water cannon at ships carrying supplies to a Philippine military outpost at 2nd Thomas Shoal. Next slide. The Philippines and Vietnam have been relatively outspoken in protesting China's intrusions into their EEZs. For example, the Philippine Foreign Secretary is known for his curse-filled complaints via Twitter. But Indonesia and Malaysia have been much quieter about Chinese maritime actions, as reflected in these quotes I posted here. 2 years ago, in an interview with BenarNews, Malaysia's then Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad conceded that, quote unquote, we have to accept that China is a big power. We don't go around trying to be aggressive when we don't have the capacity, he also said. Next slide. Mahathir acknowledged to us that his government had not granted permission for a Chinese survey ship to operate off Borneo, where Malaysia's state-run oil company was conducting activities. In April and May 2020, the next Malaysian government did not issue any kind of public protest when Chinese ships sailed into the Malaysian EEZ and shadowed the West Capella, a Malaysian contracted drilling ship operating there. Next slide. Finally, we come to the ground level, where BenarNews strives to put a human face to this geopolitical story. As an example, I'd like to share with you a video released by the Indonesian government that captures a confrontation near the Natuna Islands. The captions are by BenarNews.
China Coast Guard, 5302. This is Indonesian Coast Guard calling you over. Yes, sir, you are in Indonesian waters, sir. Please move away and go back to your territory, sir.
China has an indisputable sovereignty over the island in South China Sea and the adjacent waters, and enjoys sovereign rights and jurisdiction in the relevant.
Perlu saya ulang lagi, saya kesini juga ingin memastikan penegakan hukum.
I always get a kick out of watching this video. Next slide. My favorite example of a human story is this multimedia package we did to mark the 5th anniversary of the verdict in the landmark arbitration case that the Philippines brought against China. Our team of Philippine reporters spent a few days in fishing communities on the west coast of Luzon that have not reaped any benefits from the ruling. China has ignored it and blocked Filipino fishermen's access to prime fishing grounds off Scarborough Shoal. Our reporters came back with a powerful story, which they told through photographs, video, and text. Quote unquote, "It just makes me sad that we can't fish in the same areas where we used to," fisherman Henrylito Empok told BenarNews. "We used to be able to go there and catch big fishes, making our lives easier," he said. "Now they are driving us away and accusing us of poaching in our waters." You can take off the shared screen now. This is my favorite way to tell a story. I find it so much more interesting than the repetitive and opaque statements issued by government officials. To tell the story of the South China Sea from different altitudes, we need to penetrate the rhetoric of official statements. We need to hold all governments, and I mean all governments, accountable for their words and actions. We also need to tell the story in plain language that everyone can understand, and we need to highlight the human angle. In this way, we can capture the big story and what it means for you and me. Thanks for listening.
Well, we want to send our thank you again to Mr. Imran Vittachi for that presentation. So with the time that we do have left, I know that we have some questions here, and I'd like to open it up for anybody who would like to submit a question. And as the host, I'm going to use my prerogative to kick it off. And my first question is for Dr. Batongbacal, and that is simply, did anything that you heard or learned here today from the other panelists or from our presentation surprise you? Curious to know what struck you from these different parts of the world, watching similar issues unfold across the world.
Well, it didn't surprise me because I had been also keeping up with these instances of Chinese activities elsewhere because we were feeling it directly and we were observing it firsthand. So in that sense, I'm not surprised. What is interesting, however, is that the distance, really. You never get a sense of how far these things are happening until you actually hear the people talk about them from a personal perspective, as Mr. Kweigya so eloquently narrated. I myself am also always so affected whenever I hear the stories directly from our own fishermen. As in that presentation by Mr. Vittachi, the fishermen of Masinloc, who were the ones he featured in that in the last slides that he showed. No? I'm actually working with them now through another project, and really for them, what I realize is that they really have this sense that they have nowhere else to go now, which is why they've gotten in touch with me and trying to organize themselves into a more vocal group or association. Fishermen used to be the most difficult to organize into associations because they're always out, but now they're really finding time to do it and learning a lot, asking me to give various trainings. I've already held several about fishery laws, about UNCLOS, about the rights of fishermen, because they literally have nowhere else to go. They feel that their original fishing grounds are now being taken over. Their alternative fishing grounds are also lost because they're being blocked from getting there. And then even in their own waters, in their hometown, they're being deprived of them because of foreign capitalist businesses taking over even the fishing activities near shore. So you get this sense really that the hardest hit really are these small fishermen, the artisanal fishermen, or what we call the municipal fishermen. So they're really feeling the brunt now of all of these activities from hundreds of miles away, or perpetrated by people from hundreds of miles away. So it's really that is what is really surprising, how that is replicated in a sense in many different parts of the world. That sense, it's really being echoed elsewhere in the world.
Thank you for that. Mr. Kweigya, my second question I wanted to pose to you, and is, you again gave a really great personal perspective as a fisherman, as a practitioner, for yourself and for your community in Ghana. And I wanted to ask whether you have the sense that artisanal fishermen in the waters off of neighboring countries are dealing with a similar problem set as you are in Ghana. Oh, you are on mute.
Yeah, for countries which allows these trawlers to be fishing, I should expect that similar thing will happen. I think the last time we met at World Fisheries Day was celebrated by Cowper Africa, and then I had a chance to interact with fishers from Gambia, Senegal, and then some other African countries, and they also complain about the activities of these industrial vessels, trawlers, which are very disturbing to them. So I should believe that there's every point to believe that other fishers, small-scale fishers in sister African countries are also suffering. There's even the emergence of fish meal and fish oil processing plants, which are fast springing up. You can talk of Gambia, Senegal, Mauritania. You see the damage that it is causing artisanal fishes. So they are, of course. Thank you.
The emergence of the fish meal factories is something that we cover in our reports. We focused on a series of 3 PRC-owned fish meal factories in the Gambia, and some of the issues caused by the effluent from those fish meal factories polluting local waters, as well as the catch that is being brought in, often including these young pelagic fish that end up being not accepted and then cast back into the sea, ultimately killing those fish and not allowing them to grow to maturity and be caught by artisanal fishermen. Mr. Akpalu, my question for you is, you brought up an issue about these PRC beneficially owned trawlers in Ghana's waters shutting off their vessel monitoring systems, or VMS. And you also mentioned that these vessels are, quote, hardly ever caught. And I'm wondering why they're so rarely caught. Is it because they are turning off their tracking devices, or is it because of a lack of capability to monitor the maritime domain? What is it that is preventing more interdiction of these vessels that are conducting illegal operations?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Multiple reasons. First of all, to even say that they turn it off is being generous, because you ask those who are supposed to keep record of, data on where the vessels go, and they tell you that for months now, they are not resourced enough to be able to track those vessels. They don't have data to be able to, internet or whatever data to be able to track vessels, which is quite bizarre, for a whole section of a ministry to say that, or enforcement unit to say that they don't have, they cannot afford data to be able to track or have resources to track vessels is quite bizarre. So it's a field day. It's a field day for them. For perhaps over a year, those devices are not working, or they are able to turn them off and do whatever they want to do. And then the other thing is that when you ask them, they will tell you that they don't have the resources. For example, the Marine Police, the Naval Division that is responsible for monitoring and surveilling and all that, will tell you they don't have the resources to be able to do that effectively. So if tracking them remotely is not possible because we cannot afford to buy airtime or data to be able to track them, and then the Marine Police and the Navy is not resourced enough to be able to go there and see what is going on, that is a problem. And to add to that, although these fish eventually end up at the beach, because these boats that are canoes that have been adapted to convey these slabs of fish from the industrial trawlers to the beach do so openly. Nobody catches them for doing so. In fact, they have a whole association, and some of them even try to support political parties and all that. So it's not something that is not visible. So the political will is not there. And because there's this belief that there are, behind every vessel, there's a politician or there's a powerful person, it's very difficult to get them to comply with these rules and regulations. There was a time, in fact, not there was a time, for some time now, they've tried to implement what they call the Observer on board program, where they put individuals or people on the vessels to monitor what is going on. But again, that one too is not working because the observers allegedly get threatened, so they are not able to report whatever they see. And there's an instance where one observer disappeared up to today from, I think it was July 2019, that observer allegedly saw something and threatened to report and disappeared. And he hasn't been found. Nobody has actually been charged. They were arrested and they wrote statements and they were released. And this was a Chinese vessel called, is it Menji 15. So this has put a lot of fear in the other observers. So they prefer to take bribes or something and not report anything. So these are the issues.
Thank you for that. Well, we have hit our hour-and-a-half mark. I did want to offer any other final comments from our panelists and also ask my colleague Heidi, do you have any final questions for our panelists as well?
No additional questions. I just want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to talk to us and give us a firsthand perspective on what's going on in your countries.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, thank you very much, all of you. And we will be sending out the links to our reports as well as a recording of this webinar. So feel free to take a look at those and download them, and again, share them with your colleagues. Not wanting to take up any more of anyone's time, I'll say thank you again. Really appreciate all of your efforts preparing presentations. This was very interesting for us, and I know that it will be for our viewers.
Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.